Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk. I guess that's what I'll call this series. Last one we talked about the Dragon Ball movies, Dragon Ball Super, Z, and GT, and where they take place in the timeline, what events, had to have happened for the timeline to zing off for the movie to happen. Talked about the few movies that were canon to the timeline, or at least had a very high probability to be canon to the timeline. So I hope y'all enjoyed that. Today we're going to tackle something Legend of Zelda related. We will be talking about the timeline some, specifically in reference to Breath of the Wild. But that's not going to be what the focus is. Focus of it is to talk about how many different Link, Zeldas, and Ganons there are, and how they're reborn, reincarnated from game to game, and how many of the games are actually feature the same Link and Zelda and Ganon, because there's actually quite a few sequels games that are directly connected to each other that share the same princess and hero and things like that. Some things that we will, I don't know if it's more than one, but at least one thing we will take as fact / canon is that there is, we got the Hyrule Historia here. It's very nice. I totally recommend it. It's got the timeline in there, and that's what we're going to treat as gospel. That's comes from Nintendo, comes from Miyamoto. That's where it's at. And then at the back of this, there is a manga about Skyward Sword, which is at this time the first entry in the timeline. And the manga takes place prior to the game. It features the first Link, Hyla, and Demise. I don't know if you actually see Demise anywhere in the manga, though. Anyway, we're going to take that is canon, considering it's in this book. And the information derived from that. So, let's talk the timeline. I'm going to be looking off my book here. The picture of the timeline that's in this book is all over Google and the internet. Let's see. Let's go down the line here. My shadow is making it hard to see. But the first game is Skyward Sword. And then what comes up next is the Minish Cap and the original Four Swords. And right now the timeline's linear. There's no splits there. Nothing too exciting is happening as far as the timeline goes. And then we get to the Ocarina of Time. And this is where everything gets really screwed up. We knew, based on the events of the game, there were at least two timelines, especially after Wind Waker and Majora's Mask came to be. We knew there was a child timeline and an adult timeline. What I didn't, there may have been some people that did think of this, I never thought of it, was that there was a third branch off to where Link died in the final battle against Ganon. He made it that far, but in the what we call the adult timeline, he won. We call the fallen timeline, he lost. So we got three branches off. If we follow the child timeline, we get Majora's Mask, we get Twilight Princess, and then we get Four Swords Adventure. Following the adult timeline where Link wins, we get the Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and Spirit Tracks. And then if we follow the line that Link lost to Ganon, we get A Link to the Past, the Oracle games, Oracle of Seasons, Oracle of Ages, Link's Awakening, the original Legend of Zelda, and the Adventure of Link. Of course, there's a couple little side games in here, the CDI games. We don't talk about those. We don't talk about the CDI games. Um, there's like Link's crossbow training and Hyrule Warriors, which those I think crossbow. I don't think either one of those are considered canon. I'll have to do a little more research. One that I think is canon is Triforce Heroes. I have not played that game. I do not know very much about that game, and so my knowledge will be lacking as far as those links, because there's 3 of them on the cover, are concerned. But then there's Breath of the Wild, and that's what we're going to talk about first, is which timeline does it go in. And there's theories run rampant. It takes place in the adult timeline because we see Cockbrooks. It takes place in the Fallen timeline because we see Lionel's. Takes place in the child timeline because during a speech that Zelda gives, it says skyward bound, adrift in time, or the embers of twilight. So there's references to all 3 timelines, and one of the running theories is that Breath of the Wild is the end result for all 3 timelines. No matter what happens, Breath of the Wild is going to happen. Some say that the timeline gets refused back into a single strand with Breath of the Wild. A lot of people don't like that theory. I kind of like it in the sense that I guess Breath of the Wild would be called a fixed point in time, that has to happen for some reason. Now how that would fuse the timelines back together, I don't know. Such a thing can't even happen. But at the very least, regardless of what timeline we talk about, the end result is Breath of the Wild. There's just too much evidence for all 3 lines to say that it belongs in one or the other. If you have to brass tack it and say, no, it's got to belong to a single timeline, my vote is for the child timeline because of the speech that Zelda gives. The Kokoris could still evolve into the Cockbrooks in the child timeline. And then as far as the Lionels go, they do only appear in the Fallen timeline. But, Lionels can end up being just a byproduct of Ganon's evil. They just come about. So, but for the purposes of our talk, we're going to say that it's the end result of all 3. As we get, further down into the end of the timeline, talking about the different Links and Zeldas and Ganons, we'll decide at that point if, how we want to approach Breath of the Wild. But let's keep that open in case I need to reference. So let's start at the beginning. It's always a good place to start. In the manga for Skyward Sword, we meet the first Link, Hyla, which would be, you could call her the first Zelda, but she's really not. She's a goddess. She has not adopted the personality that would come to be known with Princess Zelda. And then Demise is there. And Link's first reincarnation into the actual game of Skyward Sword was actually brought about by Hyla. And then she herself made herself mortal, and her next, I don't want to say she was reincarnated because of something we'll mention here in just a second, but her first descendant, her first daughter, her first child, was the first Zelda. So, now was the second Link a birth descendant of the original Link? I probably will say yes for this particular moment. And there may be other instances where Link is reincarnated through bloodline possibilities. But here in a second, we'll talk about why that's not always the case with him. And of course, Demise gets sealed away. Little kind of a little interesting side note from the manga and stuff is that Link has this red loft wing, and in the manga it swears to Link that it will always be its rider, it will always follow him, take care of him, help him out, and he does in Skyward Sword. A funny little theory that kind of goes around is that Epona is a reincarnation of that Loftwing, still helping out the current hero and providing transportation and assistance and stuff. Also in I think it's just in the Fallen Timeline, you get the duck. I think it's a duck in A Link to the Past that you call with Ocarina, and it'll fly you, to certain locations. Could be a reincarnation thing there. The King of Red Lions from Wind Waker, we know is the spirit of the King of Hyrule. But it's worth noting that the boat is red in color, which is also the color of Link's Loftwing. So, but it's an interesting little theory. At least as far as Epona's concerned, I kind of like it. But pushing that to the side, we get to Skyward Sword and we meet the second Link, the first Zelda. Demise gets revived, and when we meet Demise, we automatically see his relation to the being that will become known as Ganondorf and Ganon, when he takes on a more humanoid form. Link fights him, beats him, and Demise lays a curse upon Link and Zelda and himself, saying that his hatred be forever reincarnated, and that his hatred is destined to, he says the blood of the goddess and the spirit of the hero are always going to be caught within his own curse of being tied to his darkness. So that right there sets up what's going on with Link and Zelda in Ganondorf. Whenever the goddess, whenever Hyla's power is needed, it will manifest itself in a blood ancestor of the goddess and the first Zelda all the way down. Link gets a little more freedom in how he comes back. It doesn't have to be a blood relative. When the land is in need of the chosen hero, the goddesses are able just to let his spirit come back into being of just maybe two ordinary people, two ordinary Highlands. And then, of course, when Demise fades away, the next time we meet up with his first reincarnation is in Ocarina of Time, is where we meet the first Ganondorf. Before we get there, we have the Minish Cap and the Four Swords, and it doesn't say how long has passed between Skyward Sword and the Minish Cap. Obviously, the Kingdom of Hyrule has been established. The royal family has been established. This is obviously not the Link and Zelda of Skyward Sword. The Link and Zelda and the Minish Cap are portrayed as being much younger, where the Link and Zelda and Skyward Sword, they were, late teens, probably on the cusp of adulthood. Whereas the Link and Zelda and the Four Swords is more like, late childhood, early teenage years. They're and especially in the Minish Cap, only kids, and it says, good-natured kids are allowed to meet and see the Minish. So, so we have a couple of reincarnations of Link and Zelda where Demise or Ganon is not the bad guy, but how do you pronounce his name? Vati? I think that's how you pronounce his name. Vati. He was a big enough evil to warrant the goddesses to allow Link's spirit to be reincarnated, whether that was from relatives or just a random incarnation. They had to bring him in to be. Now, between Minish Cap and the first Four Swords game, there doesn't look like there is a big gap between those two. So it's very possible that the Link and Zelda of Minish Cap are the Link and Zelda of the Four Sword. And then some time does pass. And then we get to the Ocarina of Time. Of course, there's a Princess Zelda. The royal family is established. A lot of different races are established: the Gorons, the Zoros, the Gerudo. And the Gerudos where Ganondorf hails from, one male born like every 100 years, is set to be their king. And then we have Link, and he's raised as a Kokiri, but we come to find out he's a Highland. His mother brought him there during the ravages of the Highland Civil War. So leads us to believe that his father was possibly a knight in the service of Hyrule. A lot of Link's family tends to be linked to either previous heroes, or they were in the service of the royal family somehow, either currently or in the past. But Link takes up this mantle of the hero of time. And of course, like I said, this is where, at least for Link, is where this gets really complicated, and a little bit for Ganon. It doesn't really get too complicated for Zelda, since hers is a blood passing. In all three timelines, Zelda survives, so in all three timelines, she's allowed to be able to have heirs and continue to pass on the blood of the goddess from, child to child. But let's see. Let's follow the adult timeline where Link wins. Of course, Link returns to his original time, so he no longer exists in the adult timeline, and where he wins. So there's not even a way he can have a blood relative descendant. He has no family. His mother died. His father is believed to be dead. There's just no way, blood-wise, he could have a descendant. Ganon makes a comeback. I guess that's something we should touch on. That Ganondorf is a Gerudo, but he is the reincarnation of Demise's anger and hate and things like that. And when he taps into the Triforce of Power after you beat him in his human form, he becomes Ganon, the monster. And the running theory on that is this is Demise coming out. And he can't fully manifest himself the way he wants to because of the body he shares, and so the form that Ganondorf takes is a mix of Demise's demon form influenced on the human body, or a humanoid body, and we end up with what Ganon looks like in his beast form. But I mean, concerning Ganon though, we'll talk about each one of his instances while we talk about Link's, but in the adult timeline, he gets sealed away in the Sacred Realm, And then over the course of, it doesn't say, it's a period of time, but I don't think it ever states how many years the seal weakens, because he still has the Triforce of Power. I guess I don't know what happens with the Triforce of Courage, because Link still had it, and I believe he still has it in the kid timeline. So, I don't know if it was, if when he went back as an adult, if the one from the adult timeline stayed there, because I'm guessing that there's 3 different Triforces over 3 different timelines. And of course, Zelda still has her Triforce of Wisdom. Triforce of Courage gets broken into 8 pieces right after Ganon comes back to keep him from getting the whole thing. Zelda's Triforce is broken into 2 pieces. One is left with the king, I believe, and the other one she keeps and passes down daughter to daughter. So the Ganon in Wind Waker is the same Ganon from the Ocarina of Time. So, I mean, there's no reincarnation or anything like that. I mean, the guy that got sealed away in the Ocarina of Time is the same one that is causing trouble in Wind Waker. It's not a descendant or anything like that. We see Link get reborn on an island that knows the legend of the Hero of Time very well. It's customary to put, for children as they come of age to put on a green tunic, and there's a ceremony and all that. And Link has family in this one. He's got we don't know where his parents are, but he lives with his grandma and his little sister. And then as we follow that timeline there, the Phantom Hourglass Link is the same one from the Wind Waker, which is now dubbed the Hero of Winds, the Hero of Time reincarnated. He's got a couple of different titles. But the Spirit Tracks, I think it takes place 100 years after Phantom Hourglass. So obviously the Link in that one is a new Link. Could be bloodline descendant. Doesn't really say. I think he's kind of orphaned in this one. Of course, New Hyrule has been established. There's still a Zelda sitting, in the royal family. Of course, but Link has been reincarnated here to take on it's a Demon King, Miletus. But it has nothing to do with Ganondorf. In the adult timeline, where Link wins, as of right now, is sealed at the bottom of the ocean. With the exception if we could get into talking about Breath of the Wild, but we'll get to that later. So that's the path of Link's and Zelda and Ganon's resurrection, reincarnation, however you want to word it. And then in the kid timeline, Link has come back. He comes back prior to Ganon raiding Hyrule Castle in the Ocarina of Time, tells Zelda this is what happens, and she's like, okay, well, let's do something about it. They're able to convince her dad. One of the reasons I think they're able to convince her dad is that they're both in possession of their Triforce pieces. They capture Ganondorf and attempt to kill him, but he's also in possession of his Triforce piece now, and so he's kind of immortal. And so they banish him to the Twilight Realm instead. And so we get to Twilight Princess, and the Ganondorf here is the same Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time. Not a reincarnation. The same spirit. Of course, there's a Princess Zelda and a royal family still, and the Link here, he lives on his own. I believe, I want to say there's some dialogue that he was left orphaned in the woods or something. So he has no blood family that we know of. Um, but we meet a ghost, I guess, that most of us have identified as the Link from Ocarina of Time. Of course, the game that has taken place between Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess is Majora's Mask, and it never states if Link ever came back from Termina. A lot of people assume that he's dead in Termina. That's a really good running theory, that he's going through the 5 stages of grief because he's dead. I don't think he's dead in Majora's Mask. But I do think that he never returned to Hyrule while he was searching for Navy. And so we meet that. This brings into question, Link's spirit. Is it allowed to exist in different spots at different times? And I think it's the piece of the spirit that's needed to combat the big evil of the time is what gets passed down. The ability to wield the Master Sword, to harness the Triforce of Courage, and things like that. The ghost, the Golden Wolf, Link, he still is a Link. He's still got all of his experience and memories, but he's no longer the chosen hero because his time's up. He's dead, for one, but his time's over. And then we get down to Four Swords Adventure, which sees Ganon being resurrected because we have killed him in Twilight Princess. But it's still the same spirit. With Link, the spirit that keeps getting reincarnated as Link, it's the same spirit, but it's had time to rest, and it comes into a new body, and it's not constantly having this pressure put on it. Like Ganondorf's, though, it's the same one, and he's constantly got this pressure. He keeps getting beat, he keeps trying to come back, and what ultimately happens is it ends up driving him, I think, for lack of better words, spiritually insane. He becomes power driven. Anytime he gets resurrected, 9 times out of 10 it's in his beast form, which means to me that Demise is more in control, and Demise is starting to become frustrated that, and I use frustrated lightly, that he cannot beat this Highland, this mortal. Every time he gets a shot, he's there with that sword to strike him down, and I think it's driven him mad. So anytime he gets resurrected, he's got this one thing on his mind. Whereas Link does his job, saves the world, and his, the spirit chosen by the goddess Hylia is allowed to rest until he's called forth again. But in Four Swords Adventures, both Ganondorf and Vati have been resurrected. And in that one, I believe Ganon, I want to say Ganon gets sealed by the Four Sword. We destroy Vati this time instead of resealing him up. I think we seal Ganon with the Four Sword this time. I have to check that, though. I'm not 100% sure on that. And then once again, that brings us to the end of the Child timeline in Breath of the Wild. And then in the Fallen timeline, this is obviously where there are no blood relatives, because it's the adult timeline. Link has no blood relatives. Ganon gets sealed away just like he does in the adult timeline where Link wins, but he has a lot more freedom with this seal. It's not near as powerful. It's more like that they're having to do a little give and take. They're going to have to give Ganon the Sacred Realm in order to keep Hyrule safe. And he turns the Sacred Realm into the Dark World. But so this Ganon, he's sealed, but he's still very much active, and he's got the full Triforce. So that may have been part of the reason why they couldn't fully seal him up anyway. And so the Ganon you fight in A Link to the Past has been alive for like 100 years, causing all kinds of trouble in the Sacred Realm, turning it into the Dark World. And he's in his beast form. He has fully given himself to his beast form. So I'm not 100% sure that we're not fighting Demise in A Link to the Past, but he still refers to himself as Ganon. But he has not been a human in, a century. But you end up beating him in A Link to the Past. And the Link in A Link to the Past is the same Link in the Oracle and Link's Awakening game. So we always talk about so many different Links and stuff. There's really not a whole many different of them if you put games together. Between A Link to the Past, the Oracle games, and Link's Awakening, that's 4 games featuring one Link. Because after he beats Ganon, Link gets the Triforce, gets to make a wish. And so, Hyrule's at peace, and so he sets out with the Triforce as his guide to go help other lands. And then at the end of the Oracle games, if you link them together, turn it into one big game, Ganon does get resurrected, but it's the same Ganon that we put down in Link to the Past, and his resurrection, that one actually partially fails, and so he's even more of a mindless beast than he was in a couple of other versions that we have fought him. And then in Link's Awakening, Link's sailing home for Hyrule from whichever land that he finished up in the Oracle games. He winds up on an island, and you see that this Link's biggest nightmare is for Ganon to be resurrected again at the end of the game. One of the nightmares you fight is a shadow version of Ganondorf. So, this Link is very scared. He's already had to do it twice. He's worried that he's going to have to do it a third time. But it doesn't happen. It doesn't ever say if Link makes it home. The game ends with him drifting out at sea on a piece of wood. And then sometime between Link's Awakening and the original Legend of Zelda, A Link Between Worlds happens, which is a sequel to A Link to the Past. If you play it, the Light World, and definitely the Light World map, or the Hyrule map, matches the Link to the Past one perfectly. You could overlay the maps and it works out great. Low Rule and the Dark World kind of mirror each other, but not as good as the Light Worlds do. But again, we see someone resurrect Ganon. Same Ganon, same spirit, nothing different, except this time the bad guy that resurrects him fuses together with him, makes him, with Ganon being a mindless beast, the guy that fuses with Yiga, I think it's his name, is able to take the power that Ganon has and put his mental stability in place of his, and so there's a lot more control there, but Link still wins, puts him down. Then we get to the original Zelda, and Ganon is there. He's been resurrected somehow, but it is the Ganon from Ocarina of Time still. This one has a little more presence of mind, and I don't know if that comes from him being fused with that Yiga guy. Kind of stabled him out a little bit. But we got another Link's been reincarnated, and he goes about and beats Ganon. And then the one in the Adventure of Link, that's the same Link from the original. And while you're on a quest to find the Triforce of Courage, the bad guys are trying to resurrect Ganon. You're actually in the middle of that, and if you get the game over screen, that's supposedly what happens. Ganondorf gets resurrected. But if you win, it doesn't happen. And then we are once again at where Breath of the Wild should be at. So, backing up, recapping a little bit, we got the Skyward Sword Link. We have the original Link. Then we have the Skyward Sword Link. And then we have the Minish Cap in the first Four Sword game Link, which we're assuming is the same one. And then we got the Link from the Ocarina of Time. And that Link is the same Link as the one that's in Majora's Mask. So we're up to 2, 3, 4 Links there. And we'll finish up the child timeline. There's Twilight Princess Link and Four Swords Adventure Link. So that's 6 Links there. We go over to the adult timeline where Link wins, and we get 2 more Links there because the Link in Wind Waker is the same as Phantom Hourglass, but we do get a new one. Spirit Tracks. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Links now. Then we go over to the Fallen timeline, and we get one over there. There's 3 Links over there. So that gives us a grand total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 Links. Counting Breath of the Wild, there are 12 different incarnation of Links from the beginning of Hyrule's timeline to what we believe to be currently the end of the timeline. With that, there's just as many Zeldas, but there's only one Ganondorf. The Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time is the same Ganondorf in the Kid, Adult, and Fallen timelines. He doesn't get reborn. He gets resurrected, and that makes a big difference. Link is never resurrected, unless you want to argue how he comes back in Breath of the Wild. But Link is always reborn. His spirit has had time to rest. It's gone through a process. When his spirit gets reborn, it gets reborn into a baby and is allowed to grow and develop as it needs to. Whereas Ganon's spirit, it might go to the afterlife, but it doesn't get the rest, and it's, whoever's performing the ritual, rips it back, out of the afterlife. And that could be part of the reason why some of his resurrections go sideways, is because, he's been brought back to life as opposed to being reborn. But we get to Breath of the Wild, and like I said, there's evidence that puts it in all 3 timelines. I lean more towards it being in the Kid timeline, but regardless of where it is, the game is way more technologically advanced than any other Hyrule we've ever seen. That being said, the biggest bit of technology, I think, is in Spirit Tracks in the forms of the trains and stuff. And I'm trying to think of anything other Zeldas you've seen any big technological advances, and you would say, train's not a big technological advance, but if you kind of look at some of the other things that's working, kind of is. But I think if it's, regardless of the timeline, it takes place 100 years after the last game in each timeline. So obviously this is a reborn Link, um, a new Zelda, and then the the Ganon. Oh man, sorry about that. The Ganon that's there has been sealed away for like ever. It's been and it talks about the princess with the sacred sealing power and the hero that wields the blade of evil's bane. Um, so I mean, this is like legend that everybody knows. And apparently that's happened multiple times. Even within Breath of the Wild, they talked about that the last time Ganon came about had been 10,000 years prior to the events of Breath of the Wild. So I mean, 10,000 years, and at that time they had the Guardians and the Sacred Beast and all that technological stuff. So I mean, there ain't no telling where Breath of the Wild takes place in the timeline, because I mean, and another thing that kind of helps with timeline placement is the Sheikah tribe. It's not ever mentioned really in the adult timeline, and I don't think it's ever really mentioned in the Fallen timeline. You only really hear of the Sheikah tribe in the kid timeline. With Twilight Princess and Ocarina of Time, you don't really hear about it. You hear about it a little bit in Wind Waker. I'll take that back. I don't think you hear about it anywhere else. Anyway, but I mean, and in Breath of the Wild, there's locations. You can find the ruins of Long Lawn Ranch. I'm trying to think about some others. A lot of the locations are named after different places in the game. I mean, it's almost like the Hyrule of Breath of the Wild is every other land you've ever been to fused together. It's about as big too. But going back to Link in particular, I believe I read somewhere one time that across the 3 timelines, that Wind Waker and Twilight Princess and A Link to the Past were all taking place at the same time in their respective timelines. And then so I thought about, okay, if that's true, then are they happening at the exact same time, or are they happening with enough space between them, that Link's spirit's here and it helps with this crisis, and then it's able to go over to this Link, or go over to this timeline, get reborn as another Link there to be able to help, and then go over to this timeline, get reborn, and do what he needs to do there. I mean, because if not, then you have to assume that Link's spirit can exist at the same time in 3 different timelines, which would, I don't know how that would work. But that kind of brings us to the end of this talk. I'd love to hear what y'all think. I love talking Zelda timeline and any and all kind of Zelda theories. So put your questions and comments down below. And I will catch you guys at the next one. Thank y'all for watching. Bye.